One of the key capabilities of Shipa is the one of connecting multiple Kubernetes clusters to the different Shipa pools or landing pads that you define and create on Shipa. These clusters, they may come from your own premises infrastructure as well as from Kubernetes clusters that you have installed using cloud computing service, or maybe managed Kubernetes clusters such as EKS, GKE, OKE, and others. And for this example and this video, we're going to be showing you on how to connect Kubernetes clusters to Shipa, and we're going to be leveraging an AKS cluster that we have called AKS Shipa v1. If we go to our terminal and we use kubectl get nodes, we can see that my kubectl is already connected to that cluster. And on the Shipa documentation under Kubernetes clusters, you can see detailed information on how to connect the clusters to your Shipa pools, and we're going to be following that documentation as a base for what we're going to be showing on the video. For adding the cluster, ultimately, we're going to be leveraging the Shipa cluster add command, as you can see here. And as we're going to start gathering different information as we go through the documentation, what we like doing is actually setting aside the comment here. So as we get the documentation, the information you following the documentation, we can start pasting the results in here, and we can just at the end run this command. So it's going to be a Shipa cluster add, the name of the cluster, which I'm just going to name AKS1. The name of the cluster doesn't need to be tied to the name of the cluster that the person who created your Kubernetes cluster on AKS used, or any other cluster used. This is a name for Shipa only, that Shipa will use to store that cluster information. And for you, when you list clusters and deal with your clusters, that's the name that Shipa is going to show you. So now I already know the name that I want to use, so I'm going to use AKS1 here. Now I need to get address information, pool name, cert name, and others. So as mentioned on other videos and in the documentation, for you to be able to connect your existing Kubernetes clusters to Shipa, you need a landing pad, or you need a pool to connect that cluster to. So let's go ahead and see what we have here. If we run a Shipa pool list, we see that we only have the one pool here, which is a pool created by Shipa automatically when Shipa is installed. And the one pool actually only hosts services that belongs to Shipa. So ideally, it's a great idea to actually have separate pools for your clusters. And you can use these pools as a way to segregate your clusters and your environment, such as different teams within your organization, business units, or even different environments, such as dev, QA, and production. So let's create a pool for our cluster that we're connecting. We're going to be using a descriptive file, a YAML file, to pass information about that pool. And we're going to be calling the pool AKS1. The provisioner is Kubernetes, because this pool is going to be hosting Kubernetes clusters and nodes and not Shipa nodes. So it's important to have Kubernetes as a provisioner in that case. The plan that this pool is going to be leveraging, such as how much memory, CPU, and swap applications deployed to this pool can consume, and that will be automatically applied. How many applications can actually be deployed to this pool. And here we say that scans at the code level, it will be run. So every application that is deployed to that pool will have the code checked and scanned, but we're not going to be running platform layer scans. If you want platform layer scans to be running in that case, I would have to change this to true instead of false. Since I put false in here, it's gonna actually ignore the ignore components and CVES, because this is false. If you change this to true, you can then add exceptions that you want to open to vulnerabilities that you may already be aware of and that are not in any way impacting your applications. And last but not least, in my file, I have the access to the admin team. Great. So let's go ahead and add this pool, which you can do with the Shipa pool add and pass the name of the file. Great. The pool is already created and we can see it here. Now let's go back to the documentation and start gathering the information for our cluster add command. The first info you will need to get is actually the cluster IP URL, which you can do so by running the kubectl cluster info command that we have here. So let's run it. Great, this is my cluster IP URL. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to my cluster add command. And one of the parameters that I need to pass is the address of my cluster. So since I already know it, I'll just paste it here. The other parameter that I also already know is the pool name, since we just created it, and it's called AKS1. So I'll just pass it already here. The next information I need is a CA cert file. So let's go back to our documentation. And for us to get there, I need to get information about the secret, which we can do by running kubectl get secret. Many installs have different secrets defined, and the one that we're looking for, it's always the default token one. So we can use kubectl get secret, the name of the secret we're looking for, and then the rest of the command. This is gonna give me the certificate file that we need for connecting the cluster to the Shipa pool. Great, we have it here. So we can save it to a file called certfile.crt, for example. I just copied and pasted the command, and now I have the cert file name here. So I can go back to my command that I'm putting together, and I already have now the cert name. So let me just update this here. The last step is getting the token. And for getting the token, what we're gonna need to do is creating a service account for Shipa, a Shipa admin service account, which you can copy the contents directly from the documentation. We already have that file on my terminal. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a kubectl apply to this file using this file, which creates my service account and gets me ready for the next step, which is now actually retrieve the token for that service account. Great. So it's a simple copy and paste as well. Let's go back to our command. I just replaced this with the actual content of my token, and that's it. Now, the only thing I need to do is actually run this command. What this is gonna do is this is gonna connect to your AKS cluster in that case, and we'll start adding the AKS cluster and the nodes to Shipa, and we'll connect it not only to Shipa, but to the AKS1 pool that we created previously. So every application deployed to that pool will now will be directed to that cluster, and Shipa pool will then perform all the requirements of that pool, such as security scans, enforcing the teams and services and others that we just added. We can see that the cluster is successfully added. It only takes a few seconds. And if we go to our Shipa dashboard for that instance, we're adding the cluster. We can already see that we added an AKS, an Azure cluster in here. Same thing, if we go to pools, we can see AKS cluster 1 here. And inside the pool, we now have the information on the nodes. And we can go into every individual nodes, get metadata, units, and metrics such as monitoring for your nodes. But your cluster is now connected to Shipa, and users or developers can deploy applications to your AKS1 pool, and Shipa will handle the deployment of the apps. Hope this was helpful.